And we are live. Hello, hello, everyone. Woo, 12 people is already in the chat. Hello, welcome to the Jetpack Compose Best Practices AMA at Sentry. I'm Lazar. I'm going to be your host today. I'm going to bring up one by one all of my teammates. So in the meantime, let's kick things off with just posting in the chat where you're coming from, like hello from Brazil, hello from Germany, etc., so we can see where our viewers are coming from. I'm going to start off. Hello from Toronto. It is a beautiful weather today. Just joking, we just had a snowstorm. But in today's event, we are going to be going through the Jetpack Compose best practices. I got a few teammates with me today that are going to help me answer a bunch of the questions that you're going to put in the chat. And we also have one or two that I'm interested to know the answer. Okay, we got a what's in a name from UK. Hello from UK. And yeah, we're going to go through the questions. We're going to talk about Jetpack Compose. We're gonna first kick things off with what is Jetpack Compose? Just a brief introduction, etc. And yeah, there we go. Hello from Brazil. And there's a good question. What has Sentry got to do with Jetpack Compose? And we are going to talk about this a bit later, okay? So I believe we can kick things off. If you're new to Sentry, and if you don't know what Sentry is an open source application monitoring software designed to help developers identify and resolve errors and issues within their applications. We support a lot of programming languages like Ruby, Python, JavaScript, and even platforms like iOS, Android, etc. It integrates a lot of the popular developer tools like GitHub, GitLab, Jira, Slack, so you can track and manage issues in your own preferred workflow. And of course, yeah, there's a huge range of features like error tracking, performance monitoring, profiling, etc. It is worth checking it out. There's also like customizable notifications and alerts. So every time something critical happens in your app, you have the ability to customize an alert for that to let you know through email or SMS or through Slack or through Microsoft Teams if you're using, etc. And it's, basically it allows you to stay informed about any critical issues and respond quickly. And also, since we're open source, we are like Sentry can also be self-hosted on your own infrastructure, and also the cloud-based version is there as well. Okay, so let's actually dive in. This is the AMA team. So I got myself down at the bottom. I'm Lazar Nikolov. I'm a developer relations advocate at Sentry. As I mentioned, I'm going to be your host and MC today. And then we have Marcus Hintersteiner. He's a software engineer from the mobile team, accompanied by Roman as well, software engineer from the mobile team. We got Zoe today, a product manager, and also Emily from the product marketing team. Okay, cool. Let's before we dive into the questions, I want to speak about what Jetpack Compose is. It is the new standard. All right, so it is recommended by Google. It's recommended by Google for building native Android UI. It is different from the previous view-based implementation because it introduces a totally new, different way of thinking. The old view-based implementation was imperative. Jetpack Compose is declarative. And yeah, we'll speak about that in the next slide when what pros and cons we get out of that. But TLDR, it's more intuitive and it requires less code to implement certain things. It's definitely a good idea to mention that it's still in its early days. Okay, as we can see from the chart, we are somewhere in between the first two phases, the innovators and early adopters. We can see that because out of 1+ million apps, active Android apps, only 3,600 have started to integrate Jetpack Compose. And that's pretty cool because we can see companies like Airbnb, Lyft, Nextdoor, Dropbox, and all these logos there. They have entrusted Jetpack Compose, and they have started to gradually implement that in their apps. So yeah, and let's talk about the pros and cons of Jetpack Compose real quick, because Jetpack Compose is built with Kotlin, and it's which is a programming language as opposed to XML, which is a markup language. That is the biggest factor where we get the pros of Jetpack Compose, because we are in a functional environment when we're building the UI with Kotlin. So for example, theming becomes easier and more dynamic. State management feels natural and plays a crucial role. We can compose the UIs by nesting the components, right? So like the whole app will be just one top level component, but then every other screen and element is another component nested within a different component. Since we're in a functional environment, we got dynamic layouts and conditional rendering. We can use the same refactoring tools that we used for our programming language. The Kotlin programming language produces cleaner code diffs, at least in my opinion, in my experience. And it's not currently available or possible, but there's a huge possibility to run UI tests because our components are Kotlin functions. And we can just run UI tests as like unit tests because we're testing pure functions. Okay, so the cons, of course, there are, because we're speaking, we're talking about an early stage technology. There's the lack of documentation, but I believe that's changing real quick because the Google team are covering new components and documenting them every day. Smaller communities, it takes a while to pick, for the communities to pick it up. There are some performance issues in some of the components, depending on the implementation. Not all components are supported from the previous way, and also there are limitations when building more complex UIs. Okay, so these are the cons. Have that in mind, and yeah, I believe we are ready to take your questions. So I'm gonna bring up Zoe. There we go. I'm gonna bring up Marcus, and I'm gonna bring up Roman to help me answer all these questions. Hi guys, how are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Doing great. All right, so I'm gonna kick things off with a question of my own, and that is, what tools are available in Sentry that would help me debug issues with custom composables, right? So I got custom composables in whole of my app. Like my app is built just with composables, not with activities. What tools can I use that Sentry provides to help me debug any issues, whether it's like bugs or performance issues, etc.? Who wants to take this?
I can take this one. Our SDK already offers quite a few options. For example, we have this navigation integration for Jetpack Compose. So when you browse your issue on the Sentry web, you quickly see where the user was navigating through your Compose app, which then helps you identify or find the root cause in a quicker way.
Yeah, but I can also continue. I guess we have another one, which is the user interaction breadcrumbs, where we capture when our user clicks a button or scrolls, at least we will capture breadcrumb for that automatically as well. And we also have some auto instrumentation for the navigational breadcrumbs, where we manipulate some bytecode and auto instrument the navigation controllers for you.
Awesome. So basically, using the breadcrumbs, I can pretty much see the path that the user took to trigger that error, where the user clicked, on which page they navigated, or if they were in a list, they swiped the list, etc. But is there like a way for me to see what was like on the screen when the actual error happened?
Yes. So on top of that, we also offer an option to enable screenshots or view hierarchies as they happen during the crash. So this way, you quickly see the screen which was visible to the user when the crash occurred.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you for the answers. We got some community live answers now that I'd like to showcase. Just let me. What's in the name? Ask, what has Sentry got to do with Jetpack Compose? And we want to take this as the first question or the last question.
We can take it as a first question. And so in terms of Jetpack Compose, we see that as kind of that next foray or that next frontier for Android developers. And so Sentry, what we've done is we've started building automatic out-of-the-box instrumentation and support for this framework, with the eventuality knowing that everyone who builds with Android Kotlin will be building their UI frameworks with Jetpack Compose. And so we want to support the Android developers the best that we can by building out more automatic instrumentation so that we can minimize custom instrumentation for this framework.
Awesome. Thank you, Zoe. Let's see, any more questions? Let's get this one. Sentry stack trace doesn't reference any of our code 80% of the time. What do you suggest? I feel like we need more info.
Yeah, I mean, what Sentry does is basically collects stack traces that happen, I mean, crashes and stack traces that happen within the app. So if the stack trace does not reference your code, this means, I mean, there is no Sentry fault kind of in that because we just report the stack trace that we got. But I would imagine that there is let's say probably an ANR happened, which probably does not really reference the code where exactly the ANR happened. Yeah, so to investigate ANRs, we also provide some different features and also working on improving that. But I'm not sure, like I think we need more info here actually, because yeah.
Also, yeah, but that does make sense. Yeah. Might be the dynamic sampling is configured, might be ANRs. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What's in the name also asks problems with breadcrumbs. If you have a single activity, which will, if you use Compose, then you have a problem. It will show main activity, and that's it. And they have fixed it by using base classes for all of the Compose screens. So I guess the question here is if we're like using Jetpack Compose, we only have one activity, which is the main activity, and then we use the router for navigating to other screens. There seems to be a problem with the breadcrumbs. It shows main activity and that's it. I haven't seen this. I'm not sure. Is there like a Marcus?
Yeah, for this one, that would be the behavior you would get out of the box. But we have this, like we mentioned earlier, we have this Jetpack Compose navigation integration. So if you're using that feature, and as of now, I think it needs to be enabled, then you will get more breadcrumbs, not just the one from your main activity.
Okay, yeah. I remember when I was building the app, I only had one activity. I implemented the router and also the navigation mechanism from the Sentry SDK. And yeah, if I'm not wrong, I had like 100% coverage of my app. So yeah, what's in the name? You should look into that. Then we have another question from what's in the name? Can you give me a general exception handler that will prevent crashes? I tried it, but I noticed that it was stopping the Sentry reports.
Yes. I can also take this one. Maybe, Roman, you can follow up with some more details on this. But I think we are talking here about this thread uncalled exception handler, or the default one. And since you can only set one globally, what you would need to do in order to make this work is to retrieve the current one, and then in your custom implementation, call the current one. Like you need to forward your crashes to the existing uncalled exception handler. And if you do that, you can catch them on your own, as well have Sentry support this as well. So we'll see the crashes occurring on Sentry, but you can also, in this case, have your own code dealing with those exceptions.
Yeah, that's exactly how our uncalled exception handler works at Sentry as well, because we wrap the existing one and then delegate to whatever exception handler there is to ensure that we can also work alongside other crash reporters like Firebase, Crashlytics, or some other ones. Yeah.
Awesome, cool. Let's check this one. Can we integrate Sentry in a hybrid app, all Android views and Jetpack Compose components?
Roman, do you want to take this one?
I would say, so I think we tested this even, yes. So we have our sample app where we do exactly that. So one of our activities is a compose activity, which contains some compose screens in there, but we still have some other activities. So definitely this should work. If there are any issues, please let us know, because we want to ensure it works smoothly for these cases as well.
Awesome. So basically, the SDK is aware of what we're implementing. For example, if it's an Android XML view or if it's a Jetpack Compose, and that's pretty cool. Yeah, what's in the name asks for an example. I believe that we have like one place in our GitHub organization where we can see all the examples. Can you help me find that link?
Yes,
so we can post all the examples.
Is it the example of the exception handler? That's, I guess, the question, right?
Yeah, in this case, the source code of the Sentry SDK is hosted on GitHub. Maybe we can post a link later, but there you see how our Sentry uncalled exception handler works. And if you implement your custom one in a similar fashion, it should work.
Awesome. All right. So there was one question from the registration forms that I decided not to showcase it on the AMA, but I feel like I'm going to talk about it. There was one question called, I wanna hear from Lazar about his experience building the app. So yeah, I'm gonna do some philosophy in like 3 minutes. I did an experiment where I implement the same app, the same expense tracking app in 4 different frameworks in 4 months. So a month of framework. Started off with Swift UI, then moved on to Flutter, then moved on to React Native, and then I ended with Jetpack Compose. And the full disclosure, I started off as a mobile developer, but I haven't developed mobile apps in years. Talking about like 5 years or more. So it was an interesting experience, and I think Jetpack Compose was one of my favorites. And like I had the best developer experience working on the Jetpack Compose app because it's nicely thought through, the whole framework. And I had like the least amount of friction between libraries and ways that I can implement that. Yeah, I haven't looked into networking because the app was not using any network API calls, but it was an interesting experience. And yeah, if I have to pick one, it will definitely be the Jetpack Compose version. Okay, we got some new questions. Let's see how to see what is in the Sentry stack. Otherwise, I would have to wait for it to show on the websites. How do we see what's in the Sentry stack? Okay, so like when an issue happens, how do you see locally what's in the Sentry stack before it goes live on the dashboard? I guess that is the question.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. In this case, what we allow a user to do is to have a before send callback. That's how we call it. So whenever or right before Sentry sends a crash or even an other event like a breadcrumb to our servers, you can hook into that and provide some extra data. So you could attach some extra attributes, you could provide some user details, and then they will be packed and added as part of this event. You can read up on the Sentry Android docs. There's a configuration section which shows you how to implement your custom before send callback.
Yeah, and to add to that, we also have other mechanism which is called event processor, and this gives you more flexibility when processing and enriching events. So it's not sure if that's documented exactly, but there are some examples in our SDK where we use that for adding some data to the events, so you can look up there.
Awesome, thanks guys. There's one more question. How do you run Compose UI tests, as you mentioned? Yeah, I mentioned. Last time I checked, there was like no library for doing that, but has that changed in the meantime? What do you think?
Yeah, I think the tooling itself is evolving every day, and it's a bit hard to keep up with all the new features. But yeah. I think the last time I checked, which was a few weeks ago, you can already write some tests for your composables without running it on like a device or an emulator. So there is a way to do that. It's a bit limited, but for the most basic parts of like testing clicks and ensuring that the specific button is there or not, it works just fine.
Cool. So is there like I'm not sure if is there like a library that would potentially work with Jetpack Compose? So it's like regardless of how the UI is built, since it's like a UI testing library, it technically should work on top of Android and read what's on the screen, regardless of what's the, if the developer used Views or Jetpack Compose. So like older libraries
I would say
should
yes
work
and no
technically or not? Yes and no. Okay.
I would say yes and no. So what you have in this traditional Android view system is that you usually assign some identifiers to your button. And in Compose, you don't necessarily have to do that because everything is just code. You don't need to give it an identifier. But what you can do is to use that modifier.test tag to tag your composables, and then you can use or reuse those tags for your UI tests. And there's even, I think, an extra integration Roman showed me, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, where you can actually reuse the resource lookup feature to use Compose as well. So then it supports both your traditional Android view system as well as Compose.
That's awesome. And can we use Espresso with Compose?
Yes, I think that's how our UI tests are working now for our Compose integration, actually.
Awesome. Yeah. So we're basically using Espresso. Nice. Okay. This is an interesting question. How do we add information to an exception, like additional data?
That's a good one. And again, I mean, there is again multiple mechanisms to do that. So we already mentioned them briefly, like with the before send, you could definitely do that with the event processors. And then we also have a concept of scopes within the SDK where you can have a specific scope for this specific exception and only add tags and some other information to this specific exception that you want to send it with. But there is, plenty of information around that on our docs page again.
Also, like what kind of information can we add? Can we add like any data that we potentially have?
Anything we
Like
don't
maybe
automatically collect.
Yeah.
Like breadcrumbs.
What about yeah. What about data from the user, like who the user is? Maybe that's also possible.
Yeah, we have this automatic tracking. If you enable some flags that we can send default PII, and we always associate the device, we generate a device ID, so we can assign this to events, and you can identify by that. And also, but like an example of that would be you have feature flags in your app, for example. Sentry at the moment does not support feature flags like as a out of the box, let's say. So people usually tend to use tags for feature flags. So you can add a tag with a feature flag name, let's say, and then whether the user falls under the treatment or not. That would be a good use case for that.
Okay, yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Let's see, so we have a hook.
Maybe to add that.
Okay, yeah, please.
Sorry to interrupt. But maybe to add on top of that, we also have this notion of attachments where you can actually really attach any kind of file or binary data to an event and then either view it or download it on Sentry Web.
Cool, awesome. Well, let's see. We have a hook, say in the application class, then we can add info to the report. I believe this is connected with the additional data.
Yes, exactly. So in your application class, you could call Sentry Android.init, and you can provide those options. And within those options, you can define your custom hooks. And that's how it works. Like then you get a callback. Hey, Sentry is about to send an event, and then you can attach your custom information. So that's one way of doing that.
Awesome, thank you. And this is also a good question. When is Sentry going to support this new feature of screen video attached to the Sentry report for Android mobile apps?
If I'm interpreting this question correctly, you are asking about session replay for Android, and this is definitely something on the horizon for the session replay team as well as for Sentry. It's a constant evaluation, and so we're evaluating kind of the use case for Android, and we will let you know once we are more certain as to how far along the horizon we will be supporting Android with.
Thank you, Zoe. And I have an interesting question here. What is the main advantage of using Sentry over crashlytics? Who wants to take this?
I think everyone wants to take this, right?
A bit of everyone, yeah.
Yeah, maybe
Zoe,
everyone.
maybe Zoe want to start, and then we can back her up with some technical details.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, so Sentry and Crashlytics both offer free support for Android developers. Let's start there. In the nature that a lot of people start off with Crashlytics because everybody knows Crashlytics, but at a certain point, Sentry provides additional support and details and insights that you may not necessarily get from Crashlytics. I think one of the major improvements that we've been doing, we're working on for Android, is our treatment of ANRs. We've been improving our detection of them. We've been adding ANR rates. We've also been providing additional insights in our stack traces, or working on providing additional insight into our stack traces. So that's just one example of ways that we're looking or working on providing additional insights for Android developers into things that they actually care about. With regards to reliability and code base, I will defer to Roman and Marcus here for kind of the overhead or maybe additional support that we do code-wise. So either of you guys can go ahead with that.
Yeah, maybe I can start because I especially want to highlight our performance and profiling features, which are quite unique and you can't find them somewhere else. Like in this combination, you can really see what a user did or what led up to a crash, with the addition to also getting very useful performance insights of your app, like knowing how it does out in the wild on various devices in different regions, for example. And this for me is like a killer feature.
Yes. And also to add on top of that, as far as Firebase also offers some performance monitoring, but it's mainly around network requests, and that's it. Whereas we try to capture basically everything, because we have auto instrumentation for network requests, for file I/O, for database queries done with Room or SQLite. On top of that, we also capture a lot of breadcrumbs automatically, whereas for Firebase, you have to do this manually, as far as you know. And yeah, as Marcus mentioned, profiling and performance are the main killer features, especially profiling, I would say.
Awesome, cool. All right, so I think we've answered a lot of questions. I'd like to know what comes afterwards, right? What is coming up? All right, let's see.
Yes, and here you can see a sneak peek of some features we've been working on lately. And this is like a screenshot from our Sentry web interface. And what you can see at the bottom is profiling of your composables. So what we will be able to provide you in future to see the custom composition and rendering time of every composable of your screen, which can be really very useful to find out where is the hotspots in your code, or which composables take up most of either the composition or the rendering time.
Okay, thank you, Marcus. And yeah, I hope we've been helpful to all the viewers, that we answered a bunch of questions for you. And yeah, I would like to invite Emily next to talk about Sentry and Jetpack Compose. Hello, Emily.
Yes, thank you. Thanks everyone for joining. It's great to see the questions that you had. Also really glad that we could have our Sentry experts here to answer your questions. So just wanted to round out the session with a little bit more information on what Sentry does. And, per the question that started all this, what does Sentry have to do with Jetpack Compose? How Sentry can help you and your team get started with Jetpack Compose. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Sentry, I know Lazar gave a little bit of an intro at the start, but I want to tell you a little more about who we are and who we build for. So Sentry started as open source So our ethos has always been to help the developer community improve their workflows so they can deliver really flawless applications to their users. And we do that by focusing on code and monitoring code changes across any runtime and any device, which is a more accurate and reliable approach to see what exactly is causing a broken experience or performance bottleneck, making it really easy for developers to solve these challenges quickly and without friction. And we're really proud to work with a ton of developers, from really small startups to really large organizations. We have a community of over 3.5 million developers and 85,000 organizations. And we work with leaders from companies like Disney, Rockstar Games, Slack, just to name a few. So what does this mean for teams that are interested in starting with Jetpack Compose? Well, with our Jetpack Compose integration, Sentry helps teams make the move to Jetpack Compose. Our integration with Jetpack Compose is generally available to all of our users that are on our latest version of the Android SDK. And so how exactly does Sentry help make this move? Well, the first is reducing the learning curve. So you're all here with lots of questions about getting started with Jetpack Compose. And as you heard, it's really a paradigm shift from how you may previously have been building your UI. So our integration can make it a lot easier to understand what's wrong as you're building and resolve errors. It can also help you save time. So Jetpack Compose does a lot of work for developers. You have to write less code, and Jetpack Compose takes care of the rest. But because it does abstract away a lot of the code, it makes it harder to find errors. So Sentry can help with precise context to reduce troubleshooting time with transactions and breadcrumbs. And then lastly, our integration with Jetpack Compose is automatically instrumented. So teams can see super fast time to value. They can get started in minutes, and you can have instant visibility into what is causing errors in your Jetpack Compose. And I do want to add that currently, Sentry is the only error and performance monitoring solution that does offer automatically instrumented support. I wouldn't be a good marketer if I didn't add that at the end. So before I move on, Lazar, I'm seeing a few more questions from one of our most active viewers, What's in a Name. Thank you so much for being such an active participant. Should we cover one more question before I continue on with the slides here? What do you think?
Okay, yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
All right, so the question is, my last question, I promise, because I feel like I'm underutilizing Sentry. I get errors and usually not so much useful info. As I mentioned, 80% of the time, no ref to our code. What do you recommend? I'm gonna bring up all of the team. Okay. So what do you recommend? How do you use Sentry in its full potential, aside from just using the errors?
I would say check out our docs and then get in touch with us. So we do have a very active Discord community, or you can also just open an issue on GitHub on our Sentry SDK repo, and we would be happy to help you out with that and make the best out of Sentry.
Awesome, thank you, Marcus. All right, we're gonna post the links. There we go for the Discord, for our Discord channel. Please feel free to join the channel and ask away all your questions there. Cool.
Okay. All right. Well, speaking of more resources, I did want to share a few resources that are specific to Jetpack Compose. So Lazar wrote a really great blog post with lots of tips for getting started with Jetpack Compose, and we'll share the link for that, which would be a great resource if you're getting started. You can also go directly to our docs. So we'll also share a link for our docs specifically with regard to our Jetpack Compose integration. And then lastly, we're always looking to improve. This is a newish format for us, this AMA, so we'd love to hear what you think. We shared this link a few minutes ago in the chat, but if you could just take a moment to answer a couple questions here around what worked well for you and anything you'd like to see in future AMAs, that would be great. But really appreciate everyone taking the time to join us today. What do you think, Lazar? Should we wrap up the session?
Yeah, definitely. Let's just post the survey link
Okay.
in the chat. So there we go. Thank you, Sarah. Awesome. Yeah, I feel like we've been helpful. I had fun going through this AMA. I feel like we answered some pretty good questions. And also, yeah, thank you to What's in a Name for the biggest contributions to the questions base, and also to CAWSRT. Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for joining. And also thank you, Emily, thank you, Zoe, thank you, Marcus, thank you, Roman, for making this happen.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.